when, where, and how I became aware of the power of mindset. I was 20 or 21 years old. I was still living at home. Only my youngest brother and myself were still there. He was 5 years younger than me. The other three siblings had moved out of the house, were at college, married. And so my parents, while not quite empty nesters, were right on that verge of becoming empty nesters. I noticed something, a change in mom and dad that frankly surprised me. They suddenly started paying attention to each other in a way that they hadn't necessarily paid attention to each other for the many years as I was a child. They were always busy paying attention to us kids. And something, they realized that they were going to be empty nesters and that they would need to rely and count on each other. And it wasn't like they suddenly stopped paying attention to us, but they shifted their attention to each other. And that was the backdrop of what I was witnessing at this time in my life. Mom and Dad decided to attend a marriage encounter weekend, and that was really the thing that changed for them. Mom had been attending weekly prayer groups, and Dad started attending these sessions weekly on Wednesday night with her. I remember they went to a flower show together, and my siblings and I talked about it, and we were like, oh my God, Mom and Dad went to a flower show. That was not typical behavior, but they were in the process of, getting to know each other in a way that they hadn't done for many, many years. So that's kind of the backdrop of what was happening in my life at the time. I also became aware that other couples around the same age as my parents didn't go and make an effort to get to know each other again. They ended up splitting up after the kids left because they didn't have anything left in common. And so I was very aware that Mom and Dad were paying attention to each other. So I'm about 20 years old, and I'm living at home, and I'm working with my father, and I'm making good money, but I'm basically behaving a bit like a derelict. I'm hanging out with a group of guys several nights a week, and we're smoking pot, drinking beer, playing pool, ping pong. Not that there's anything wrong with all those things, but just as a steady diet, it wasn't the most intellectual and stimulating behavior for a young man to be participating. I remember one night at dinner, I used some type of a slang phrase, and my parents both kind of jumped on me and they said, "Why are you talking like that? You don't sound very intelligent. Is that who you want to be in your life?" And I really that kind of stopped me in my tracks and made me start to think about that. Shortly thereafter, they invited me to participate in this weekend retreat, a retreat sponsored by the church. But the way they kind of framed it for me was they said, "Hey, we think it would be good for you to attend, but we'd really like you to attend because we think that if you attend, your younger brother will also want to attend, and we're concerned about him, and we think it would be beneficial for him." So now I'm faced with this dilemma. Gee, do I not go, or do I screw up my brother's life because I chose not to go? So I ended up choosing to go. I remember an interesting thing happening when I got there. I thought, well, since I'm here, I might as well make the best of it, and I'll go ahead and I'll pay attention to what they have to say and what's the worst thing that can happen, and maybe it will be beneficial for me. That was a shift in my life. I had been rebelling for the last multiple years where I was, I wasn't other than acting like a derelict, I wasn't in too much trouble, but I wasn't certainly pushing myself to achieve and to make a better situation for myself. I was just kind of drifting along aimlessly. Any normal, mature adult would say, if I'm involved in a situation, of course I'm going to pay attention and get the most out of it. But for me, again, this was kind of a shift where I hadn't been thinking that way, and suddenly I was thinking that way. So I'm there and I'm listening to the speakers. A few were clergy, most of them were lay people, and they were just telling their stories and different things about their life. And I'm listening and I'm enjoying hearing what I'm hearing. And I'm realizing, and there's a common thread to it, is that they all made a choice to take responsibility for their life. And they basically made a choice to not be victims, to not walk around with a black cloud over their head and blaming others, and being marred in disappointment and anger and bitterness, but rather basically saying, I'll take responsibility for my life. And it wasn't a real religious type of message. It was just a commonsensical, hey, just take responsibility for your life. Shortly thereafter, within the next few months, or certainly within a year, I moved to California, and now I'm on my own. And I ended up subscribing to Success Magazine, and through Success Magazine, they had these cassettes you could buy, and audio cassettes, and you would hear different motivational speakers, and they all had some type of message of mindset and taking responsibility and adjusting the way you look at the world. And I became a student of these different speakers and listened to it and was just taking it all in. This was all happening when I was 22, 23 years old, 24 years old, living in California. In fact, today I still have the cassette case filled with those different audio cassettes. Probably, I don't know, 20 years ago, I threw them away one day. I emptied out the case because they just weren't listenable anymore. The audio had gotten so bad you couldn't hear them. It was so scratchy and they were worn out. And then I had this empty case, and I thought, well, now what am I going to do with it? And so I ended up retrieving all of the cassettes from the trash can, and I kept the ones that I wanted. I filled one case filled up, and so I still have them as kind of a memory of those days. Looking back, I realized that weekend was a pivotal moment. It was the weekend that I went from being an irresponsible teenager, just sort of drifting along in life, to a young man who said, I have to take responsibility and I have to take control of my life. One funny or ironic thing is that at the time, I don't remember ever discussing the weekend with my parents or with my brother. It wasn't like an earth-shattering, life-changing moment. It was just one of those things I went and did, and when mom and dad said, how was it? I probably went, oh, it's great, and that was it. And we didn't talk about it. And if I talked to my brother about it, he probably said, oh, that was great. And we never discussed it at the time. So years later, I bring the weekend up to my mom and dad, and I ask them about it, and they kind of barely remember it. And I asked them about them insisting that I attend so that I would save my brother's life. And they said, oh, we don't remember it that way. We just thought it would be helpful for you. And I asked my brother about it, and he doesn't even remember attending the weekend. So the one good thing is that he turned out okay, even though it didn't affect him the way it affected me. So today I talk about gumption, and gumption is based on the idea of personal responsibility, and gumption is the way you think, the way you act, and the way you interact with others. The big gear right smack in the middle of the Function with Gumption logo represents your mindset. Ironically, about 10 years ago, when I went down the path of developing a motivational message, I told the coach that I was working with at the time that I wanted to speak about personal responsibility. And he said, nobody will hire you to talk about personal responsibility. And I was like, well, that's a bummer, because that's what I want to talk about. And so anyway, we came up with the idea that I would talk about gumption, and I hadn't really defined what gumption meant back then. And gumption ultimately came to mean personal responsibility for your thoughts, actions, and interactions with others. So it's kind of ironic the way life works and the way we twist and turn and the way we end up exactly where we are today, not necessarily planning to get there, but getting there anyway. And that weekend was the one that changed my life for the better.